Have you ever thought about what it was like to be the plague? Not the people who had it, but the disease itself? No? Perfect. You're in exactly the right place. Because tonight, we're taking a slow, oddly soothing journey into one of the worst times in human history, the Middle Ages. More specifically, we're going to unpack exactly why it sucked to be a medieval plague. Yes, the plague, the Black Death, the bubonic bad boy of the 14th century, the pandemic before pandemics were mainstream. But don't worry, this story won't make your heart race. It'll help you wind down, drift off, and maybe chuckle sleepily at just how terrible everything was for everyone. Let's rewind to the year 1346. Europe was thriving. If by thriving you mean surviving mud, famine, illiteracy, and the occasional peasant revolt. Towns were growing, trade was bustling, and people had just enough hope to be absolutely devastated when it was taken away. Enter the plague. And no, it didn't sneak in quietly. It crashed into the world with the subtlety of a medieval battering ram. But from a plague's point of view, its job was clear. Move fast, reproduce often, and leave behind a trail of chaos that historians would talk about forever. Unfortunately for the plague, medieval Europe was not the easiest place to do business. First off, transportation was a nightmare. No high-speed trains. No cars. Just flea-infested rats hitching rides on creaky merchant ships, spreading Yersinia pestis from port to port. And these weren't luxury cruises. These were wooden death traps, loaded with grain, rotting food, and deeply confused sailors who hadn't bathed in 3 seasons. The plague's earliest hosts had to survive long, miserable sea voyages with nothing but bad air rats and the occasional religious relic to keep them company. Not exactly 5-star accommodations. When the plague finally made landfall, it faced another problem: medieval hygiene, or rather, the total lack of it. You'd think this would be ideal for a disease, right? Wrong. Even bacteria have standards. People dumped waste in the streets. Bathing was considered suspicious, even sinful. Water was dangerous to drink. So people drank weak beer, because nothing says hydration like a warm mug of barley water. The cities were a perfect breeding ground, but the hosts? They were shockingly resilient in their own gross way. Now, if you were the plague and you want to be efficient, you'd need to infect a population with strong social ties and frequent contact. Enter the feudal system, where most people barely saw anyone outside their village. Social distancing? They called that being a serf. Great for avoiding taxes. Terrible for pandemics. Villages were small, isolated, and poor, meaning that while the plague could burn through a local population, it often had to wait for traders or soldiers to carry it to the next unlucky cluster of humans. But oh, when it really spread. The symptoms were brutal. Boils the size of eggs, blackened limbs, fever, vomiting blood. And this wasn't a slow disease. It moved fast. People could die within days. But here's the thing. The more lethal a disease is, the harder it is to spread. Dead people don't travel. And in many places, the plague killed its victims so quickly that it ran out of hosts. From a purely biological perspective, it was a terrible business model. High mortality, low sustainability. Nature's version of a flash sale. Still, the plague did manage to make an impact, a big one. Between 1347 and 1351, it wiped out an estimated 25 to 50 million people, about a third of Europe's population. For the plague, that a career high. For humanity, it was the worst group project ever. But for you, lying there in bed, listening to the gentle droning of medieval despair, it's a chance to appreciate just how far we've come. Like plumbing, that's a big one. Back then, cities were places of stink, disease, and chaos. If you were lucky, you might live near a stream that hadn't been completely poisoned by upstream tanneries. If you were really lucky, your town had a gong farmer, a person whose actual job was to clean out cesspits and transport human waste. Spoiler, it did not pay well. People lived stacked in wooden houses, cooked indoors over open flames, and shared their homes with chickens, pigs, and sometimes their entire extended family. If fire didn't get you, famine might. If famine didn't, bandits. And if bandits didn't, well, the plague was always around the corner, like a really aggressive door-to-door salesman. Medicine? Don't even ask. Doctors wore beaked masks filled with herbs, like some sort of herbalist toucan Sam. They believed bad smells carried disease, miasma. They called it. So they walked around waving perfume cloths and smoking out rooms. Cutting-edge science, really. Bleeding patients was also popular. Nothing says healing like draining blood from a sick, dehydrated person. And yet, despite all of this, the plague was still blamed on witches, Jews, sinners, and planets being in the wrong alignment. The stars weren't just out of sync. They were out to get us. People joined flagellant cults, whipping themselves through town squares in hope that God might stop the plague if he saw enough people suffering voluntarily. Spoiler, it didn't work. For the plague, all of this chaos was useful, but exhausting. Constant travel, constant mutation, hosts dying before they could even sneeze properly, people lighting herbs on fire to scare it away. It was like trying to start a wildfire with wet matches. And let's not forget winter. Cold weather slowed everything down. The plague preferred warm, crowded, smelly cities, not snow-covered huts with frozen latrines and villagers too cold to cough. But perhaps the worst part for the plague was its competition. Medieval life was already full of diseases. Typhoid, dysentery, smallpox, an all-star team of microscopic misery. Being the most famous disease in the 14th century was like being the loudest banjo player in a marching band of chaos. Sure, you made noise, but nobody really liked you. Eventually, the plague lost momentum. Herd immunity? Maybe. Fewer hosts? Definitely. Better hygiene? Not likely, but we'll be generous. The plague retreated, though it never vanished. It still popped up in later centuries like a bad sequel, never quite recapturing its original fame. The